Then there is the problem of the successes that the government has had with jailing earth liberation and animal liberation activists. I would suggest that the activists who have been caught and have been jailed are probably the most committed of all, right? To be willing to commit serious crimes and look at monster jail time, and now that label terrorism, right? Daniel McGowan, whose photo is right over here, and the film about Daniel, there's a poster of it right up there if a tree falls. You know, Daniel McGowan will live the rest of his life with terrorist across his forehead. The most committed people are locked away, and you can't do very much at all when you're in prison. You might be able to write, right? If you're in one of the serious, what does the C stand for in management unit? Communication. That's it. Sorry, I literally couldn't remember. Communication management units, right, are there in part to shut you off from the rest of the world, right? So if you're a terrorist, that's where you're going to be sent in prison, and you can't communicate. You can't help lead. And the L word, leadership, is a challenging one to use in the anarchist world, and I acknowledge that. But the fact is, the people who are out there who are talking to folks who have the potential to recruit them to the movement are, in fact, leaders. And when leaders are in prison, they can't do what we all need them to do, which is to help get us to a very, very different relationship with this planet.
Well, first of all, people who come here a lot are pretty familiar with political prisoner issues. We deal a lot with political prisoners here. We work directly with several that are in New York State and several that are national. And I would disagree with the notion that you can't do or accomplish anything while in prison. And we can take Daniel McGowan, for example, because you brought him up. Oscar-nominated documentary came out while he was in prison, which he orchestrated. I can promise you that he wouldn't have been able to get an Oscar-nominated documentary produced on the Earth Liberation Front had he not been facing that jail time and had the situation not gotten that severe. We see people like Mumia Abu-Jamal, we see people like Nelson Mandela, and Leonard Peltier, who have accomplished, while they all should be free, please don't get me wrong, everyone should be free, but putting someone in prison doesn't eliminate them from part of our consciousness. And in fact, it draws us towards realizing that prison is an issue in itself. When people from the Earth Liberation Movement were sent to prison, it drew our movement directly towards recognizing all these other movements that had political prisoners too. All of a sudden, we weren't just looking at radical environmentalists and animal rights activists anymore, because they were alongside people from the Black liberation struggle who are still in prison from that time period. And it broadened our perspective and made us work directly with all these other political prisoners, because now we were working on political prisoner issues. It's not a good thing to be in prison, but it doesn't stop you. Same thing with getting killed. It's not a good thing to get killed for a movement, but it does not stop the movement. Sometimes it can be made to things like that can be made to draw more attention to a movement. I think that's key. We're kind of skirting around this bigger issue. It's key to understand that when a movement goes beyond civil disobedience, in particular towards property destruction or what might be considered violence, it's really no longer a reformist movement. It's not trying to make reform happen, right? The guy the director of If a Tree Falls, would always say at these interviews afterwards to me in private, like, I just don't think that sabotage is going to change government policy on environmentalism. And I couldn't agree more. Like, sabotage is not going to change government policy. It's not intended to, right? It's because you have a different philosophy you're enacting when you engage in underground struggle or guerrilla struggle or direct action or whatever you want to call it. You don't necessarily believe that policy change is possible, or that if it is possible, that it's effective. And you've taken up some kind of other agenda to come one step or two steps or three steps closer to forcing the kind of change. It's Ulrike Meinhof is by all accounts was a violent revolutionary in Germany, and I actually wrote down a quote from her that I'm obsessed with. Protest is when I say this does not please me. Resistance is when I ensure that what does not please me occurs no more. Right? So you've crossed that line between protest and resistance if you're involved in a group like the Earth Liberation Front or the Animal Liberation Front. You're not simply protesting, you're actually trying to force change. You're tired of asking people who are not listening and who are not responsive to the change. You feel the change is desperate and you're willing to push hard and take personal sacrifices like risking prison, like being labeled a terrorist. You've decided to accept those consequences as part of, being engaged in a larger movement that fights harder and potentially has more to win.